So hi folks, welcome back to the next stage of our Shay build, and this time we're into the nitty gritty of all the mechanical parts with the cylinders. So just starting off with the base plate, and these parts will build up the crankshaft and keeping them all in their packs because it's important to get the right bits in the right place. And we've got the diagram here to show us what goes where for stage 2. So I started assembly on the crankshaft, and I've done one of the webs, and there's a definite build sequence to this which we'll run through. So there's a little flat on the ends of the rods like that, and the grub screw needs to go up against it, and that gives you the 90-degree angle between the two sets of crank pins. That's called quartering, and it's done so that when one cylinder's on top dead centre, the other one's actually working, and the engine won't have a dead centre. Now the crank pin itself, you can squeak it in when it's in that position, and you need the con rod on it. So you should be able to just push him in his little hole. That's it. And I'll nip him up with the grub screw.
Can't see it.
So I haven't actually got that grub screw on the flat yet. I'm going to have to move that round. There we go. So we've got this far with the crankshaft, but I need to finish it off with the ends, and there's a washer there to go down inside before that end gets put in, and the little flat there is for the grub screw to go on. So once you've actually got this assembled, there's a diagram on the manual, and it gives you some dimensions, and you can adjust the grub screws to get these dimensions here. And I'm using a vernier on it, or very near as we like to call it, and I've got 10mm across the webs, which is pretty good. Let's try that web as well. Yeah, and 74, that can't be right, 7.4 between these two parts, which I'm not quite there with yet, and 6.9. But you can set that up with a screw, with an ordinary ruler. It doesn't have to be that accurate. You've got a little bit of leeway there. Now we've got the crankshaft all complete. I've been round and tightened all the little grub screws with the Allen key and put a spot of seep-in Loctite, which is this one, 290, just a tiny spot on each grub screw and on all the joints in the crankshaft. And that completes stage 2. We've now moved on to page 3 in the build manual, and this is the cylinder set. So it's the heart of the loco. We have to make sure we get it all correct. Just looking around the parts, we've got cylinders, cylinder covers, pistons, gudgeon pins, gaskets, O-rings, and various other bits and bobs. So we'll make a start, but before that there's a final part to do on the crankshaft, and this involves the eccentrics on the ends of the crankshaft. They need setting. According to the manual, the setup for the valve eccentrics is as you see it here. So with the left-hand crank facing away from the mounting bracket, this eccentric is at the top of its travel, and then with this crank at the bottom, the right-hand crank, this eccentric is at 90 degrees facing out towards me. This is all adjustable once it's on the engine so we don't have to worry too much, but this is a good initial setup. So I've laid out the stuff to start the actual piston assembly. I've got the pistons themselves, covers, gaskets, O-rings and what have you. And I'm going to start by putting an O-ring onto a piston. Just rolls over into the groove. Quite a tight fit. There we are. Now that goes in the piston, but I'm going to put some oil in first. This is ordinary like cycle oil, very thin. And you'll find once the piston is in, let's put a little bit of oil around the piston as well. It'll make a lot of difference to the way it can go up and down in the piston. Just wiggle it in, there we are. So that's now in. Oh, was in. It's pretty tight, but it'll settle as it gets used. The piston now needs the covers. So we've got a back cover here, and orientating it so that it lines up with the flat on the side of the cylinder. But before that goes in, it needs a gasket. Now the gaskets, you can use sealant on them, but personally I just like a little bit of oil on them. Line up the holes, put some oil on the top as well. And the cover can go straight on, and it needs the stainless screws. Because you've got the steam there, we use stainless screws on these. And there's 6mm long ones going on the bottom where the piston rod is, and 5mm long ones going on the top. There we go. I fitted the bottom covers to these pistons, and I put in the gland nut with a little O-ring. Now I just want to make sure that they actually go up and down nice and freely. And we're ready then to mount them onto the valve block. So this is the valve block assembly, and these are the gaskets. So we'll start off by putting a gasket on that top surface. Put a little bit of oil on it just to help it seal. That goes there. And then oil the top of the gasket. And that cylinder can now be fitted to the valve chest on that side. And we've got 12mm long stainless screws for this job. So I've assembled the cylinders onto their steam chests, and just still checking that the pistons go up and down. I haven't put the top covers on. I'm going to see where the piston comes before assembling those. But the next part is the crosshead and the trunk guide. So the crosshead screws onto the piston rod, and then we'll put a little bit of screw lock on that. And then we've got the trunk guides. Now these have absolutely tiny little grub screws in them with the smallest Allen key, and they slide on over. The slot goes sideways so that you can get the screw into the crosshead. That is going to be my next stage in the construction. I just nip these two little grub screws up, and then these supports go on the side of the trunk guides with some screws on the front and back. Right, we've got the cylinder set assembled now. I've put the 2 cylinders on and tightened up all the steam chests and put the trunk guides on. But before we go too much further with that, I just want to double check that everything's in line. Check the cylinders are square across the top and an equal gap between them. The steam pipes are a little bit flexible, so you can just tweak it to where it needs to go. The next stage is to take the crankshaft and add, first of all, the moulding round the bottom. There's a little folded tin bracket and it's held on with screws underneath and also down inside. And then the 2 supports for the cylinders are screwed on the top. You can get into them straight down like so. And then we're ready to put the 2 parts together. So the cylinders slide into the supports there. Just make sure the little conrods are lined up. It's a little bit of a fiddle, but there we go. That's where the screws need to go in, on the top here and here. And then we'll look at putting in the pins for the conrods and the valve gear. So to finish off this cylinder set, I've done a few little bits and bobs. I put the top covers on the cylinders. I've put the screws in on the crossheads, and in order to lock them in place, I put a little bit of Loctite on the end of a cocktail stick and just touched it onto the thread, so that should lock that in place, both cylinders. And then I've looked at setting the valve gear. Well, when the eccentric is in its absolute top position, there should be about 1 millimetre or so sticking out on the bottom of the valve. There's a little mark there that you work to. So the maximum amount into the cylinder is up to that little mark, and you can adjust it on this crosshead with the locking nut, and once you're happy with it, the little circlet goes on. Then I've also just temporarily put on the reversing block just to make sure that the threads all line up. These are flexible, you can move them about a little bit. And the last job on stage 3 now is the universal joints that go on the ends of the crankshaft. So I've got the little grub screws in there, and then I'm going to fit these circular parts which form the centre bit of the universal joint. So that will go like so, and then these ones go in there with a pin. So, and that'll be the end of stage 3.